welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am your host, Madison, and today we will be tackling the Electoral College. As we approach the upcoming presidential election, I often ask myself, what is it? Where did it come from? Why do we hate it? Is there any way to change it? Today, I hope to answer these questions and maybe a little bit more. So, what is the Electoral College and where did it come from? The Electoral College that we have today is based on a compromise that the Founding Fathers came to when it came to the matter of deciding who the president would be. Some wanted only Congress to vote for the president, and others wanted the president to be a direct representation of qualified voters. To make both sides happy, neither would directly choose the president, and a group of electors would make the decision. The Founding Fathers did not refer to the Electoral College as such, the name came later. The way the Electoral College works has changed slightly over the years, with the introduction of the 12th Amendment before the 1804 election, the progression and expansion of voting rights, and the way states use the popular vote to decide who will be appointed as electors. The 12th Amendment pretty much just explains how the Electoral College works. The system is almost exactly the same that we do today, in a less wordy explanation than reading the entirety of the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment pretty much says, electors meet in their states and they vote on the president and the vice president. They then sign, certify, and transfer the documents in a sealed container to the leader of the Senate. The leader of the Senate will then verify what the electors have chosen. With that, the president has been decided. Some interesting things from the amendment: if no one has the majority, like if we had 4 people running for president and they all kind of tied, the top 3 would be in the running and the House of Representatives would choose the president. Each state would have 1 vote. The same process follows for the 2 that are left, but this time with the Senate for the vice president. What elections have been impacted by the Electoral College? There have been 5 elections that have been impacted by the Electoral College. There were 3 elections in the 1800s that resulted in the loser of the popular vote winning the election through the Electoral College: 1824, 1876, and 1888. It did not happen again until 2000 and 2016. The 2 more recent ones are still slightly fresh in the minds, with Bush beating Gore in 2000, quite the story itself, and Trump beating Clinton in 2016. In 1824, John Quincy Adams beat Andrew Jackson. This was only the 6th election that had ever happened. Neither man won a majority of the electoral vote, so the vote was sent to the House. There were actually 4 candidates in this election: Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and William Crawford. Jackson and Adams had the 2 highest delegation of electors. At this time, there was only one national political party, the Democratic Republican Party, but as time went on, more political parties began to splinter off, further solidifying our current 2-party system. In 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes beat Samuel J. Tilden. This election was one of the most contentious elections to have ever occurred in the U.S. Tilden won over 50% of the popular vote with over 200,000 more votes than Hayes, but it all came down to where those votes came from. The election was originally called for Tilden, with 20 unresolved elector votes from Florida, Oregon, Louisiana, and South Carolina. To resolve this, Congress created the Electoral Commission, where 5 senators, 5 members of the House, and 5 Supreme Court justices would vote on who won. The members of Congress voted on party lines, so it ended up being the Supreme Court who decided the election. They voted for Hayes, and he would become president. Looks like Bush v. Gore was not the first election decided by the Supreme Court. Anywho, this election is still debated today. It was also the election that had the highest voter turnout of eligible voters at 82.6%, and Tilden still holds the record for largest share of the popular vote received by a candidate who did not ultimately win the election. This led to the Electoral Count Act of 1887, which was a direct result of the 1876 election. The Congressional Research Service interprets this act for modern-day application as follows. Objections to individual state returns must be made in writing by at least 1 member each of the Senate and the House of Representatives. If an objection meets these requirements, the joint session recesses and the 2 houses separate and debate the question in their respective chambers for a maximum of 2 hours. The 2 houses then vote separately to accept or reject the objection. They then reassemble in joint session and announce the results of their respective votes. An objection to a state's electoral vote must be approved by both houses in order for any contested votes to be excluded. In 1888, Benjamin Harrison would beat Grover Cleveland. This one is a little spicy due to the fact that Cleveland was the incumbent at the time. Cleveland had won the popular vote by about 100,000 votes, but Harrison ultimately won the numbers game with more electoral votes. Amazingly, we went more than 100 years without these circumstances happening again. I'm not going to get into the 2000 or 2016 presidential elections. Each of these elections has a more in-depth story, but for the sake of this episode, we are going to keep moving on with the Electoral College. Will this ever change? Well, probably not anytime soon. The Electoral College has fallen more and more out of favor over the course of each election cycle. But for anything to change, we would need some major compromise and working together to happen in Congress. With the state of things today, I just do not see that happening. There have been attempts over the years to change this, with many different proposals to alter the election process being brought up in Congress. The most basic resolve would be to do a direct nationwide election by the eligible voters. As we are still working on the system originally compromised on by the Founding Fathers, there has been no luck in advancing any of these alternative ways of voting. Under the most common method for amending the Constitution, an amendment must be proposed by a 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress and ratified by 3/4 of the states. The Electoral College typically works well with our two-party system, but as mentioned, not all the time. One of the handicaps of this system is when it comes to any third-party candidate. There has never been a third-party candidate to win the election, but they have in the past been able to acquire electoral votes. Teddy Roosevelt was the last third-party candidate to make any kind of significant showing, and that was in 1912. He would end up winning 88 of the electoral votes. The most recent third-party candidates to make any sort of impression on the presidential election were Ross Perot in 1992 and Gary Johnson in 2016. Ross Perot won 19% of the popular vote in 1992, but did not perform overwhelmingly in any one state. He did not win any electoral votes as his votes were spread throughout the nation. Just how many electors does my state get? Electoral votes are dispersed among the states based on the census that happens every 10 years. States are given votes based on how many members of Congress their state has. This number is based on both the Senate and the House combined. DC, while not a state, is still given 3 votes. Each state decides how to appoint its electors. Every state, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, have a winner-take-all policy, where the winner for the state is determined by the popular vote. Maine and Nebraska vote based on congressional district, so if candidate A wins 5 districts and candidate B wins 6 districts, 5 votes will go to A and 6 votes will go to B, but the winner of the state will also receive 2 elector votes. Who even are the electors? Who is this mysterious group of people that have so much power over our nation? How are they chosen? At the bare minimum, electors cannot be a current member of Congress or a person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States. What does that mean? Well, Google tells me a person holding an office of trust is someone who is an elected or appointed position in a company or organization, particularly a position that is also financially beneficial. Electors can also not be someone who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, according to the 14th Amendment. This amendment was introduced after the Civil War to originally avoid having anyone who was involved with the Confederacy, especially the government created under the Confederacy, from being involved in the election process. We then enter into a 2-step process. In the first step of the process, each political party chooses who would be the elector in the case that their candidate gets the vote. These are often people that the political party wants to recognize for their service and dedication to the political party. These people can be state elected officials, state party leaders, or people in the state who have a personal or political affiliation with the party's presidential nominee. This process is not the same in each state. The second step happens during the general election. When we go to the voting polls, we are actually voting for the electors who will represent our vote. Some states have these listed under the name of the candidate, others do not. Each candidate will have a completely different set of electors, and it depends on which candidate who wins the popular vote of the state for which specific group of electors will represent the people. Of course, let's not forget Nebraska and Maine. The winner of the state popular vote will receive 2 electors from the state, and the winner of each congressional district will receive 1 elector. Now, what about when the electors vote for president? How does that work? At the meeting of the electors, which occurs the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, electors cast their vote for president. In a perfect world, each state will vote for who the state's population has decided they want to be president. But there is no constitutional provision or federal laws that actually require electors to vote this way. We have essentially just put our good faith trust into a group of 538 individuals to vote for the president. There are some states that require their electors vote according to the popular vote, but that is not all states. Some states have laws that faithless electors who vote against what the state has chosen, can be subject to fines or may even be disqualified for casting an invalid vote. They would then be replaced by a substitute elector. In 2020, the Supreme Court decided that states can enact requirements on how electors vote. At this time, no elector has ever been prosecuted for failing to vote as they pledged. In 2016, there were several instances of electors being disqualified and replaced, others being fined for failing to vote as they pledged in this election. Throughout the course of U.S. history, over 99% of electors have voted as they pledged. Electors are usually someone either important to the party or someone who has dedicated time to the party. Going against the party would most definitely tarnish your reputation. Amongst your peers. After the electors vote for the president, the vote has to be certified by Congress. This is typically a formality. Congress will meet in joint session with both the House and the Senate on January 6th to officially count the electoral votes. The vice president, who is the president of the Senate, opens the vote to the states, and in alphabetical order, they hand the votes to an appointed teller who will announce the results out loud. Then the president of the Senate will call for any objections. According to the National Archives, to be recognized, an objection must first be submitted in writing, second, be signed by at least 1/5 of the House and 1/5 of the Senate, and third, state clearly and concisely without argument one of the two acceptable grounds for objection. Those are A, the electors of this state were not lawfully certified under a certificate of ascertainment, or B, the vote of one or more electors has not been regularly given. In a typical January 6th proceeding, the president will be officially named. As we know from past elections, the president is usually called either on election day or the few days following, as states' votes are counted. So we really already know who will be president. To reiterate, this meeting is typically a formality, just to officialize the election. As we approach the 2024 election, I am curious to see if and how the Electoral College will affect the outcome of this election. Current polls have this election very close, and it will be the fate of very few states that decide who is president. So that's the Electoral College. I hope I was able to answer any questions you had on this process. I certainly learned more over the course of researching this episode. Sources used in today's episode include multiple articles from the National Archives, the National Constitution Center, and Wikipedia. I have never plugged my email before, but if you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, feel free to email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com with no apostrophe. Thank you for listening, and I hope to have you in the next one.